perhaps not as well as we should formally, because we'll punish criminals, for example, by putting them in solitary confinement. And that's another indication of the impossibility of, maybe if you were an expert meditator and a religious man, you could tolerate the solitude, but you probably wouldn't be a criminal then. So my point is that I view this process of integration as a multi-layered process that involves the integration of the community all the way up to the highest place. And that highest place has to be a unity, as Jonathan pointed out, or we're divided. And so we might want to seek amongst us as much as we can for a common unity, at least start with that. And that's what we're trying to do in this conversation.
Yes, but unity is different to uniformity. So I say the difference being is that, in the Islamic discussion or discourse, it's like there's a verse in the Quran, in fact, it says, "Lakum dinukum waliya din." You have your religion, we have ours. We can demarcate and still tolerate. That's the point. And I think
appreciate even.
Yeah, even appreciate.
That would be
Absolutely.
good.
We can even love each other. It's
no
issue at all.
I don't know if we can manage that.
No, I think we can. I mean, that's the thing. Going back to the message to Muslims, I think this is where. Can I ask you a question? Have you ever been to a Muslim country?
Yes.
Which ones have you been to?
I've been to Morocco, and I've been to Turkey, and now have I been to any other Muslim countries? Okay. Not yet.
Okay.
There's many on the itinerary.
Okay. Go to a Muslim country with a Christian population. I'm originally from Egypt. Yeah, we've had Coptic Christians there for years.
Yes.
Yeah, we've had them for 1,400 years. I mean, they were there before the Muslims came, right? And the point is that if you go to Ghana, go to Nigeria, this bleak image of Muslims and Christians kind of fighting each other, I don't think that's what's really going on. I'm not saying that there's no grievance there when the Christian community is in Muslim majority lands. That would be a lie, and that would be false, and that can easily be refuted. What I am saying is that it's not as bad as you think. If you go to these countries, you will not find, I do not think you will find what's going on, for example, you're talking about Hindutva, in India with the Muslim minorities and a Hindu, supposedly, majority, which is a peaceful religion. What's going on there? What's going on in China with the Muslim minority there? Or, for example, may I add, sorry to say, but what's happening in Palestine as well?
I don't want to paint any large-scale endeavor with the brush that's, let's say, dipped in the blood of its worst excesses. I don't think that's helpful, because then we're all irredeemable in some real sense. I think it's much wiser for us to see what we can jointly celebrate and see if we can manage that in something like a spirit of ignorance and hope. Because one of the things I learned a long time ago, it was very helpful for me as a clinician, was that if everything wasn't perfect around me all the time, it was probably, at least in part, because I was much less than I could conceivably be. And one of the things I learned from Carl Jung, who's a great thinker, was that what you need most will be found where you least want to look. And yes, well, and it's almost by definition, right? Because you can imagine that you're most likely to be most ignorant about.
That's a bar.
What you need most is where you're less likely to look. Yeah, that's deep. But I like what they're saying. I mean, I like what they're saying so far in regards to, being able to come to a happy medium and at least communicate amongst each other, whether or not we wholeheartedly agree, we still may be able to come to a common ground and have a discussion about, our beliefs or faith-based or how we can do things in the community.
Right.
So I like that.
Okay.
About what you're most afraid of and most contemptuous of. And so by definition, that's the last place you want to look. And if you're an advocate of a given religious faith, one of the last places you might want to look is in the wisdom of an alternative faith.
I agree.
But that's who are you to be such a committed advocate of a faith that's so complex that there's no way that someone like you can understand it. And I mean that of your own faith. And so it's not so obvious that the stranger you think is the devil doesn't have something to say.
I get you, but I once heard you quote Carl Jung, because obviously you mention him a lot in your books, and I learned a lot from you about Carl Jung. Yeah, that he stated that the West are technological giants but moral dwarfs.
In comparison, yes.
Yeah. So,
and that's the problem all over the world increasingly, right?
Yeah,
We're technological giants, but
agree.
moral midgets.
To some extent. But what I was going to say here is that, going back to Carl Jung here, because, for example, and going back to the issue of purpose, if we're speaking about purpose, I watched your discussion with Sam Harris, and you were speaking about your
The last one?
No, there was one that you done. I don't know what. It wasn't that famous. You weren't speaking to him like this. But there was one point of it which really was like, it gave me an insight into your. I don't want to be a psychologist here, right? But it gave me maybe I dare say it gave me an insight into your psychological state, because Sam Harris, he said to you, your conception of pragmatism. That truth is malleable or whatever. It's not one capital T truth like correspondence.
Well, I said more that I don't believe that the most fundamental truth is objective in the scientific sense, and I don't think it can be. So not that objective truth isn't useful.
So in that sense, your perspective, and you will know this as well, is more epistemologically pragmatist rather than correspondence theory, right? So correspondence theory says like one truth out there.
I think correspondence theories have to be nested under pragmatic theories in some real sense.
So you're saying the same thing as the American pragmatist said, Charles Peirce and William James.
Okay, yes, very much.
So what I was going to say with that, he said if you believe in this, it will be at your peril. And you know what you said? You responded, you retorted, you said, it has been at my peril. You said it has. Now, let's focus on this, because this is actually deep. You said it has been at my peril. Why would
everything's at your peril, man.
No, but think about this for a second, because I heard your voice and these words stuck in my mind. You said it has been at my peril. Now let me submit something to you today. Could it be that it's at your peril because if you don't believe in truth with a capital T in the correspondence theory sense, that there is a God, and that's a true statement, just like 2 + 2 = 4 is a true statement, just like the geocentric model, the heliocentric model is a true statement. In that sense, there is a God out there. And he created the world. He created you. He's sustaining the universe. He is maintaining the universe. There is a true statement, and that is in a correspondence theory sense. If you don't have that level of certainty, then you will end up being in existential angst, and you will end up being depressed. Because that's what the Quran says. The Quran states, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِ فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. Whoever swerves away from my remembrance will have a depressed life. So for us,
I think almost by definition, when you veer from a path oriented towards the highest unity, that you fall apart. It's by definition. Now, I don't know.
And I believe that. So I believe when you, although we're Christian, we still have our differences that are things that we definitely don't agree with Islam. But I'm going to say that they're believing in God. So, and we believe in God. But I've noticed when a person does not believe in God, there's always an empty space about them. There's an emptiness. People that go atheists go into these other beliefs that does not acknowledge God as the one and only deity. There are other deities, but he is the creator. There's always an emptiness, and there's always a lack, and there's always a sadness, and there's always a depression that seem to be lingers in those people.
What that means specifically with regards to a correspondence theory, because the correspondence theorists tend to be more oriented towards a materialist viewpoint, and that doesn't seem to me to work out very well when discussing something like God. Do I think that we strive towards a higher unity, that unity is real and that it's necessary?
No, but there's no contradiction in having correspondence theory in dualism or idealism. It doesn't have to be materialism, because that would indicate the truthhood of empiricism.
I would say then my answer to that is that I try to act as if that's true. And I think I say I act as if it's true because I'm not in a position to make any final judgments in some real sense, but I am in a position to stake my life on certain faith-based propositions. That's what you can do. That doesn't mean you're right, but that's what you have at your disposal. And so I am trying to do that, to feel the proper way forward in this spirit of, let's say, playful unity, and to put that above all else, which is partly why I also said that I did it at my peril.
The thing is, what I would say is that if you take the proposition that truth is utility, and what is useful is that which is true, that's basically the American pragmatist stance. If you take that...
Well, it's not exactly. Not exactly. Well, See, I think
that's what Charles Peirce said almost by word.
I know.
Yeah.
The pragmatists are more like engineers, which is, well, you can't build a perfect bridge because what do you know? You can't build anything perfect, but you can build a bridge that's a bridge insofar as it will stand up and allow you to walk across it for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then the notion there is, well, it's not perfect. It doesn't correspond precisely to the ultimate nature of reality, let's say, but it's good enough to move you from point A to point B. And so...
Yes, but going back to Viktor Frankl and the idea of meaning, what I'm saying is, I know you're a psychoanalyst, this, from the Quranic paradigm, this will not be enough. Meaning, based on your current paradigm, according to the Islamic diagnosis, you will be depressed. Why? Because your purpose is not strong enough. Do you see the point?
Yes, well, that's probably true.
So, I know that sounds a bit intrusive, so I do apologize for that. But
I don't think it is intrusive, because I think if you deviate from that orientation towards unity, then I know this from a psychological perspective. If you deviate from orientation toward the highest unity, which you might think about as the highest goal, two things happen. One is you experience less positive emotion, so joy and enthusiasm and engagement, because positive emotion is experienced in relation to a goal, not as a consequence of achieving it.
Yes.
So if you're pursuing the highest goal, then you're celebrating most intently. And then if the goal you're pursuing isn't unified, then it's multiplicitous, and then you're confused and anxious and unstable and depressed.
Exactly.
So I would say
that's just like what I said.
Yeah,
that's what I said. Because when you don't know who you are in God, you're always on this I'm trying to find myself journey, when there's nothing to look for outside of yourself. When you keep trying to look for out yourself, you find everything else that the world has to offer, which is whack and confused.
That's true by definition.
What I was reading recently, I've read all your books, and I even read some of your peer-reviewed work, because when I was going to speak to you, then I said, you know what, I'm going to do my homework. So I read everything. One of the things that you said one time in The Maps of Meaning, you started off the book by saying, when you were a young lad, I don't know how young you were, you said that you found the doctrines of Christianity incomprehensible and absurd, And you also said that you found you had some kind of issue with Christianity because of the Genesis narrative and how incongruent it was with scientific narratives. You went to a pastor, you said, or a church cleric or something, and then you left the church. Now, I've got a question. Do you still have the same position, or have you changed your position?
Well, I've changed my position a lot. I was only 13 then, and I was caught up in the battle, insofar it was manifested in me when I was 13. I was caught in the battle between Enlightenment rationality and traditional narrative belief. I had no idea how to reconcile those two things.
Do you feel like you can do that now?
I'm doing my best to reconcile.
So let me be more
and I think, well, I certainly can do it a lot more than I did when I was 13.
Let me give you an example, right? This point, when you were 13, I think you were thinking straight. I'll be sorry to be very straight.
It's hard to believe that someone is disagreeable with you as you would manage that.
Because someone with an IQ of 180 or whatever you have, someone of your intelligence. When you were 13, you probably had an IQ of, 120 or something, So you were operating like my friend over here, Ali Dawa, on his level, at the age of 13. But what I was going to say was that, the reason why I think you were... Because look at the Trinity, for example. Look at the schisms. Now, this goes to your specialism. The idea of three all-powerful entities, that Jesus is all-powerful, that the Father is all-powerful, the Son is all-powerful, and the Holy Spirit is all-powerful, but there's not three all-powerfuls, there's one all-powerful. You have one ultimately willing being, which is a person, which is Jesus, and another person, which is ultimately willing, which is the Son. The Quran says about this, it says, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. In chapter 23, verse number 91, it says that Allah has not taken any son, and he did not have any creator with him. Had that been the case, they would have stripped one another for what they would have competed and tried to outstrip one another for power. Meaning this idea of three all-powerful persons is unintelligible, to say the least. The idea that Jesus Christ exhibits two natures. I know that there are schisms and there's differences of opinion among Christians, but the fact that you have this human nature where Jesus is walking and he sees the tree and he can't eat from the tree, he doesn't know that the tree is in season or not, or that he doesn't know when the hour is, or whatever it may be. The Quran says it very clearly. كَانَا يَأْكُلَانِ الطَّعَامِ. Him and his mum used to eat food. This proposition that they're limited and unlimited at the same time is it's a contradiction. It's an affront to logic. This will cause you cognitive dissonance. Because if you want to be a rational actor, and you want to be...
See, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a rational actor.
But you do when you do your scientific experiments.
That's true.
So why'd you separate the two things?
Because rationality should be subordinated to something above it. And I'm trying to subordinate myself to that. And so my reaction to what you're saying is that this isn't an insult.
Yeah,
I'm telling you what my reaction is.
Please say
it's not even a criticism.
Of course.
I find that discussion, as soon as it started, I found that less interesting than what we were doing before. It was harder for me to focus on. And I think the reason for that is that it transforms to some, and I'm not saying this isn't necessary at sometimes, but it transforms the transcendent into something like an intellectual and propositional discussion. And so in some sense, we're debating perhaps not the fine points of theology, because they're more like the blunt points of theology.
I understand.
But there's something about that that isn't what I want to do with you.
Yes.
You know?
Okay, so yeah. I like the fact he's like, wait a minute. That was him at 13. Mm-hmm. So now, of course, I don't share those same viewpoints because of how I'm professing, my faith and what I believe. Mm-hmm. And to say that Genesis has a lot of contradictions to what, though? I guess he did say science, but that's science.
That's science. Science is when you look at it, science is a human being. Genesis is God. You can't compare them.
And I know science is relative, and through science is how we were able to prove that Christ did come, and
because it's showing now. They nowadays really
is evidence
up to maybe the last 5 years or 6 years or something like that.
I know it's
they didn't know. Now they realize that Christ was a real person that really existed. That was a real man here that died. That there's no remnants
in the tomb for 3 days. Yeah.
Of his body. So it's so they finally have come to the conclusion that was a real thing.